Hello, it's Will Lightfoot, and I'm here today to talk with Bill Lightfoot about an incident that happened to him on the Concorde, the world's fastest commercial jetliner, many years ago. The interview is in two parts and runs about an hour long. The first part is about 50 minutes, and the second part is about 10 minutes. Yeah, here's the interview. All right. Today I'm here with Bill Lightfoot, and we're going to be talking about his experience on the Concorde and an event that happened. Before we get into it, could I just ask you what you knew about the Concorde before you boarded it, and what made the aircraft so special compared to other commercial aircrafts?
Well, the Concorde, starting in, say, the late 60s and certainly in the 70s, got a great deal of publicity, mostly because of its speed. And it made it possible for you to get to, the time was less than half, travel time less than half of conventional jet aircraft. So it went from maybe 8 to 10 hours to get across the Atlantic, say, to like 4 hours. So instead of having to fly at night and then waste the whole night or day, it actually made it, you could say, breakfast time, you could leave the U.S. and have lunch in Europe. So it really bought at least a full work day.
Right.
And also it had a lot of status as far as the people who took it, with the show business people and senior executives and jet setters, true jet setters and so on. It had publicity out of all proportion, really, particularly because the French and British, who were the main builders of the aircraft, just made it sort of a national treasure. So it got massive amounts of publicity at the time for its speed and glamour, maybe I could say.
Right. And before the incident occurred, had you ever flown the Concorde prior?
I had probably at least twice before.
And was it everything that they said? It was just amazing how much faster you
It
got
really
to your
was.
destination.
Yeah, just incredible. Well, as I say, you could leave at lunchtime, say Washington D.C. or New York, and have dinner in Paris or London, or similarly breakfast in New York or Boston, and lunch in Europe. So, and also, again, the glamour associated with the thing, the people you met at the terminal in the special Concorde housing, the quality of food. It was just ultra gourmet food,
Right.
first class service. So yeah, it was, the whole experience was very interesting.
And for those who would fly the Concorde, would the ticket prices, were they evident that you had a much better experience? So I guess what I'm asking is, did the ticket prices reflect how much faster you got there and how much more luxurious the
Yeah,
aircraft
they
was?
were at least twice first class, so they were very
Jeez.
expensive.
Yeah.
Most companies, for example, would not
Expensive.
would not
right.
pay for Concorde. Maybe for their president, but I mean, even vice presidents and so on, very few people flew Concorde. The thing was, I had my own consulting business at the time, and I was consulting. I had a couple of very high dollar clients who didn't watch expenses that carefully. I was consulting for a company called Triad, which was Adnan Khashoggi, who at the time people said he was the richest man in the world. He wasn't, but people thought that. In fact, there was a popular bestseller book in the United States by a guy named Kessler called The Richest Man in the World about Adnan Khashoggi. Well, I was consulting for Adnan, and And it certainly didn't bother him that I took Concorde.
Right, right.
So,
So that was nice. That was a perk.
it was. Well, a lot of Adnan never flew commercial. He had his own jets,
Right.
and a lot of his guys flew their own jets. So when they used to say, "How'd you get over here?" I would just say, "I came commercial."
A commercial airliner.
Yeah. So if you said commercial, that
Yeah.
alone to Adnan was a budget trip.
Right.
Yeah. So
And when the flight, the incident occurred, you were flying out of Dulles and
Yes.
flying into where?
Paris.
Into Paris?
Was going over for the Paris Air Show.
Okay. And what all were you going to see at the air show?
Well, the Paris Air Show is the biggest air show in the world. Well, biggest commercial air show in the world. It's where all of the defense industry goes, and even the big commercial suppliers, like Airbus and Boeing and so on. But mostly it's governments, and it's again, a very ultra first class setup. The hospitality suites and chalets and so on. Everyone in the commercial aircraft world goes to the Paris Air Show.
Okay. And was the Concorde going to be an aircraft that was featured at the show?
No,
No?
it had been in previous years, but by that time
was
it
so
was kind of a
mainstream.
regular
Okay.
commercial deal.
Okay. So while you were on the Concorde, could you just explain the events leading up to what you saw and what startled you and the pilots on board?
Yeah. First of all, I should note the Concorde's very small inside. That is a surprise. When you get inside, it's very small. It's like a DC-3, which is an old pre-World War II aircraft transport.
So how many seats would be across?
two and two.
Two and two. Okay.
And it was a squeeze at 2 and 2. You just barely fit in 2 and 2. Not a lot of, and one very narrow aisle.
And while you were flying, did it feel like you were going twice as fast than a regular commercial airliner?
Well, yes and no. For one thing is the height. I think it flew at like 60,000 feet, which it flew at about twice the altitude of a normal commercial aircraft. And you could actually see the curvature of the Earth easily. When you looked out
Wow.
those little windows, you could see. And I say little windows because of the heat that the skin generated of the aircraft at that speed. They had first they had to have 3 layers of glazing, as they say, 3 layers of windows, which is most aircraft only have 2. And they had to do that because of the heat. The outer layer of the skin got so hot because of the speed it would burn you actually if you touch you if you didn't have the extra layer. So it had 3 small windows, and the windows again had to be small for structural reasons because they would have blown out if they were big ordinary windows. So and then as far as knowing the speed on the bulkhead of the aircraft that you looked at as you sit in your seat, you look to the forward bulkhead, there was a huge Mach meter, like a digital clock that spun, so you could see the speed.
How fast it was going.
They emphasized the speed, and it was in Mach number. You know, Mach is the speed of sound, and they so they emphasized that. They had this big Mach meter.
So they like to show it off.
They like to show it off, yeah, how fast they were going. So yeah, you were aware because when you looked out, it was a different view than from a normal commercial aircraft because the sky was very, very dark, and you could see the curvature of the Earth. So you knew you were going along.
Where on the plane were you sitting?
About 2/3 of the way back on the port side. 35B, I remember the seat well, so I was in the window seat, port side, about 2/3 of the way back.
Okay. Were there any children on board? Were there families, or was it still mostly just like business?
There were
And
women on board, usually very attractive women, because that's who goes around
right.
high dollar places like that. In fact, there was The flight I was on actually started in Mexico City, went to Dulles, and then to Paris. So there were some Mexican nationals on board, and as I said, a very elegant-looking Mexican lady sitting next to me, but no children. I didn't see any children. I don't
Okay.
remember any children.
Okay.
Again, that's an awful lot of money for a child.
Right. It's a lot to spend on a
Yeah.
family vacation. So what happened that ended up startling you, and what did you see that freaked you out?
Okay, for some reason I've forgotten. I decided to time the takeoff. I've forgotten. I had some reason to do that, and I had a background in aviation a bit. I had sold airplanes for Northrop for a while. I sold fighter planes in Europe and the Middle East for Northrop, so I did have something of a background in aviation. Anyway, so I was timing the takeoff, and probably that's why I was looking out the window. I had a stopwatch feature on my watch, and I was timing the takeoff. So just an instant before we took off, the airplane really shuddered, as if it was a lot of potholes in the runway, except I knew there weren't potholes in the runway.
Right.
The airplane shook, and it felt like a car that had blown its tires. So what I figured, they had blown one or more tires, the way it shook. That's just before it rotated. It rotates when they get ready to take off, and it lifts the nose wheel. Okay, so just before it lifted, I think what they call V1 usually, the rotation speed. So the airplane shook and then lifted off, and just at the instant it lifted off, because I was looking out the window because I was timing the airplane, a big chunk of something silver looking went by my window vertically, up and down. Well, normally the takeoff speed of the airplane is about 200 miles an hour.
Jeez.
So at 200 miles an hour, anything that goes by the window should be going horizontal.
Right.
Yeah, like a bird or some condensation or anything should be going horizontal. Nothing should be going by vertically.
Shooting fast
and something
enough,
went by my window right as the shaking took place. So that got me very excited. So I lifted up my belts to look down at the wing and see what happened. But the problem is, because of the three layers of glazing, it's hard to see out of the window, and they're small. It's not like a regular, like a 707 or 747 where you can see out easily. So I had to loosen my belt, and I scoot step in my seat, looked down the window, and I could see a huge tear in the wing with liquid pouring out. Lots of liquid pouring out.
And this is now while you're airborne.
And now we had lifted off. While all that's happening, we'd taken off, and there's a physical tear in the skin of the wing, and pieces of the airplane ripping off, and you could see the fuel. But see, they couldn't see that because of the shape of the wing. It's got that delta wing. They can't see any of that from the flight deck.
Right.
From the flight deck, and later I've sat up in the flight deck of the one out of Dulles, for example. There's a Concorde out of Dulles. They couldn't see any of that.
So the wings are like way in the back of the plane.
Way in the back.
Okay.
And as they look back, all they can see is the leading edge.
Right.
Yeah. But they obviously knew that
Something
had happened,
right.
because they felt the shaking, obviously.
And I'm sure they could see that they were losing fuel. They had to have.
Well,
too.
after a couple minutes they did, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So after you saw that, did you tell the person you were sitting next to, or did you call over a stewardess, or did you try to keep everyone calm and
Well,
keep
both. I didn't want to alarm the lady next to me. In fact, through the whole thing, I was trying not to, start screaming
Like-
fire or whatever. So I just pulled the signal button, the hostess call button.
Right.
She came back, and I'll kind of condense this because it was a big, long exercise. And I said, I got her to lean over So I was whispering right into her ear, and I said, "Excuse me, but there's a big problem here. There's a hole in the wing." And she said, this French host said, "No, there's not a hole in the wing. That's the flaps." And I said, "No, this isn't the flaps."
There's a hole in the
Yeah,
wing.
it's all with, pieces ripping off, pieces of aluminum or magnesium ripping off, and fuel or hydraulic fluid pouring out. I didn't know what, but I finally figured it had to be fuel because it was too much for hydraulic fluid.
Right.
But stuff leaking out, and you could even see the hoses protruding from the
Oh
wing.
my goodness.
Because I kept turning around and looking back, and they got what they call air-equip, which are stainless steel hoses, and those were pooching out of the wing, rupturing out of the. She said, "No, it's the flaps." I said, "This is not the flaps. You have a hole in the wing." So she said, "It isn't that." So she went up to the deck and came back, up to the flight deck, and came back and says, "No, we know what it is. I've talked to the pilot, and we know what it is. We've blown some tires. We've blown them before. We know what it is, and we're going to Paris because that's where we have our spares. We don't keep spares at Dulles. We don't keep spare tires at Dulles." Now later, Air France, but she said, "We know what it is. We've blown tires numbers of times before, and we know what it is." Well, later Air France said they never said they blew tires before, but in the investigations that followed over the years, and there were a lot of investigations, particularly after there was another Concorde incident you might know
That
about
exploded,
that
right?
killed everyone.
Right.
And there ended up being a lot of investigations, and then it came out that they had been blowing tires for years. And they had, during the incident we're talking about, they had already blown tires a bunch of times. So they knew that, although they denied it for a long time.
Jeez.
Yeah. So,
And do you think they were keeping that so hidden because the plane was making them so much money?
what's that?
Do you think that they weren't publicizing the malfunctions that they were consistently having because the plane was doing so well commercially, making so much money?
No, actually,
Or
it
was
never
for
did well. They
prestige?
always lost money on it. But it was such a big image thing. You just, in this area, you can't imagine what a big deal it was in England and France. I mean, the Concorde, it was like they're landing on the moon for those
Right.
two countries. It was the biggest thing technologically they had ever done, and they were so proud of it. It was more national image. The airplane always lost money.
Right.
It wasn't big enough. At the time they made it, Boeing was going to make one, but Boeing said that make a supersonic aircraft transport. But Boeing always maintained you could never make the numbers work with a small airplane like that.
Right.
So it always lost money, but both governments, both the French and British government, seemed to be happy to lose money because of the image. It was such a good image.
Right.
It was like our moon program. Cost
Right.
us a bundle, but we thought it was worth it.
Right. So then, after she came back and said that the plane, it does this, we know exactly
yeah.
what's wrong, but you have seen an
Yeah.
actual hole in the wing.
Yeah.
Was your reaction after that like, I have to sit down, maybe calm down a little bit, they might be right, or it was, no, this woman's full of shit, I have to do something, I have to tell someone?
Well, the latter. I said, obviously I got to tell something because
Right.
meanwhile I'm looking up at that bulkhead, and the Mach meter is spinning around. I mean, and he's got the throttles fully open by that point.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, while all this conversation's going on, they started serving drinks, if you can possibly imagine.
Jeez.
And later they turned the smoking light on while all this. So they turned the smoking light on and they start serving drinks, and I said, no, this can't last. So I said, I'm going up and talking to the pilot, and she said, but the seatbelts were still on. And so I started actually up the aisle to go to the pilot,
Right.
flight deck, and she got really upset and said, "Sit down. You have to sit down. You have to sit down." And I said, "No, there's a big problem here, and I'm going up and talk to the pilot." And she says, "Okay, I'll talk. I'll bring the co-pilot back, and he'll talk to you, but you have to sit down. Strap yourself back." So I went to my seat. She went up and got a guy that I was told later, somebody said he was the flight engineer, somebody said he was the co-pilot, but it didn't matter. And so they got this guy, and he came back. Now again, from the aisle, because of the angle from the aisle, you couldn't see the tear in the wing.
Right.
So I literally took the guy's head and shoved it over against the window, and there's several witnesses to that later. And when he saw it, he said, "Mon Dieu."
What does that mean?
My God.
My God.
French. And in fact, later BBC ran a couple specials on the thing, and they called it the Mon Dieu episode. The Brits like that. So then he went running up the aisle. By now, the angle of attack was very steep. They're going out. In fact, about all this time, we went out over Baltimore. We're over the water. And the instant, though, he got up there, because, let me just go back. They knew they had blown tires. They had blown tires, turns out, lots of time before, but they didn't know that it had damaged anything.
Right.
And so the instant he got up there, they jerked the throttles back. You could see the throttles went back, and they turned the smoking light off and started jerking the airplane around. And
I'm sure food service stopped as well.
Hmm?
I'm sure the food service stopped as well.
Yeah. The booze service stopped, and the smoking light went out, and they said, "Tighten your seatbelts." And he started making violent maneuvers with the airplane. Later, there's been a lot of discussion in the various investigations if he should have been maneuvering the airplane that way, but whatever he was trying to do. See, you have to understand too, and I've heard all of the flight deck recordings and all, they released all that stuff, some of it years later, so I've listened to all this. There were all kind of alarms going off, so he was the pilot, who turned out to be okay, was under a lot of stress.
Right.
He's got, leaking fuel alarms. He's got, every sort of electrical short alarms, all kind of things buzzing and going off, and, landing gear failure alarms and everything. So the whole cockpit was just a cacophony of noise. So, and now he knows he's losing fuel and hydraulic fluid and all kind of red lights all over his instrument panel. So he knew he's got in trouble. There was one thing though. They said he went on. He declared an emergency. The pilot declared an emergency over the air traffic control channel. So I think one of the FAA stations, I think Leesburg, came back and said, "Okay, sir, we understand you have an emergency. We understand you're losing fuel. What do you want to do? Where do you want to? We can put you in Dulles. We can put you in Friendship, or Kennedy." And so he said, "Well, I think we'll go to Paris because that's where our spares are." Well, the ATC guy comes back and says, "Well, excuse me, sir. We thought you said you had a hole in the wing, and we thought you said you were losing fuel. Do you think you could make Paris?" Well, of course, he couldn't make Paris.
Right.
Why he said that, I'm sure he's sorry he did. 'Cause
yeah.
It's in all of the reports, of course.
Right.
That he says he's going to Paris, and they say, "We don't think you're going to make Paris." They said, the most pavement we can give you is Dulles, of the places we think you can reach. But first, we want you to fly over Dulles and let us take a look at what's going on with the wing. So what he did, he turned the aircraft around. But now then we were off over the Atlantic.
And at this point, what was everyone on plane? Were they just silent, looking forward, scared, or
Well, they never really, they might have said tighten your seatbelt, but they never declared an emergency in the aircraft, at that point anyway. At that point, they, except for shutting down the booze service and turning off the no smoking, they didn't make any general thing like put your pillow in your lap and put your
Get
head in
ready,
your pillow.
yeah.
Normally that they'd do, they didn't do all that.
And was there anyone who saw the confrontation with the co-pilot and the stewardess who asked, like, was the woman who was sitting next to you, did she ask what was that about?
Yeah, a couple of people were saying what's going on, and I just said, well, I think it's going to be okay. But I did take pains not to start yelling or screaming or telling
That's
people.
good.
Yeah, because later, I don't want to pick on any nationality or anything, but some of the Mexican, a couple of the Mexican ladies got extremely alarmed later on. Extremely alarmed. So, but up until then, it was very quiet. I just said, no, I think it's going to be okay. Because I've been basically whispering, except for the guy yelling, Mon Dieu, there hadn't been a lot of.
So as long as you weren't French and didn't understand French, you might
Yeah,
have been not
Didn't
worried.
think it was that big a deal.
Right.
Yeah. So, and then what happened? So they told him to fly over Dulles, which he did, and they saw the hole. But meantime, when they went over Dulles, they dumped JP4 fuel just all over the place. Turns out it was really pouring fuel. We couldn't see all that, of course.
Right.
And they told him basically, yeah, you got a Volkswagen-sized hole in your wing, but don't come over here anymore. Essentially. So they said, what we're going to do is put you out on the Shenandoah and get rid of your fuel. Then we're going to give you, and I forget, it was 19L or whatever. They assigned one of the airstrips out there, and I forgot which one, at Dulles. And then they said, we don't think we have time to get foam down, but 19, whatever it is, L or whatever, which was the longest one they had, we're opening that up for you, and we're going to put you down there. Well, it turns out later, though, he came within a few hundred feet of Mount Weather. Mount Weather is a big mountain out there. In fact, where a TWA plane had crashed a few years before. It's a big spook site run by the American intel people. It's where the Congress goes, incidentally. And anyway, he came within a few hundred feet of hitting it, so he did his best, and he made a good landing in that he didn't have, port side gear.
Right.
But he was rattled for sure, because he never should have been that low.
Right.
Just shouldn't have been. So anyway, he went out over the Shenandoah and dumped just about all of his fuel, or dumped what was left of it, because they always want minimum fuel if they think you're going to crash.
Right.
Yeah. And then...
And that would be for, like, explosions.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So he dumped all the fuel out there and then came in and made a very good landing, given that what had happened when the tires blew up, a couple of tires blew out, and then they have magnesium wheels. Magnesium's light, but it's very brittle.
Mm-hmm.
When the wheels banged down on the pavement, they broke up. And then chunks of the wheel spun off tangentially, and one or more chunks of the wheel went up through the left wing, port wing. Pieces of it went into the engine, and pieces of it ruptured. Pieces of this big chunk of alloy went right through the fuel tank and came out the top of the wing. So that's where all the stuff was. Cut a bunch of hydraulic lines, cut a bunch of electrical lines, and...
So at what point did the pilot, did he ever come on the PA system and say, hey folks, we're turning around, we're landing in Dulles again?
Right at the end, they said, yeah, pillows in your lap, but it was only, we were landing by the time
Right.
they said anything.
Right. And so, was the landing itself rough? Was it bumpy? Or was that, like, better than you thought it was
Okay.
going to be given
It was
the
better than I
circumstance?
thought it was going to be. What he did, he landed on the starboard gear, on his right side gear, and kept the weight off the port side until the last minute. Then when he finally set it down on the other side, then we twisted sideways and slid for a while, which I was afraid of sparks and fire.
Right.
It was amazing that it didn't light up, actually.
Right.
Just amazing, because you could by that time you could smell the JP4, you could smell the fuel inside the airplane. I mean, it just reeked of fuel inside the airplane. And it turns out, to digress, the exact same thing happened later in the Paris crash that killed everyone.
Mm-hmm.
The exact precise thing happened.
Tire
The
shrapnel.
port side tires blew out, dropped the wheel on the pavement, broke up the wheels. Pieces of the wheel went up into the engine and through the fuel tank, and then that one lit. Turns out the plane we were on lit also, but none of us knew that. But pictures they took later showed a blossom of flame, and then for whatever reason it went out. Just right after we took off, there was a blossom of flame, and between the speed and just the combination of things, it blew itself out.
Sounds like the combination of speed and dumb luck.
Dumb
That is-
luck, unbelievable.
That's crazy.
Because it's the same thing. It should have lit right there, and the other one did. The Paris plane did, but that was a fluke. And there were pictures later, in fact, published in Aviation Week and other places, showing that it lit and blew out. Just freaky.
And so, before I get to that question, after you guys had landed,
Yeah.
did you all have to go talk to executives or police, or not executives, but like maybe engineers of the Concorde itself? And did you have to talk to airport officials and stuff like that, or
No,
everyone
quite
was
the
just free to
opposite.
go?
Now I'll tell you though, maybe the scariest thing to me of the whole thing is then we just sat there. So we were sitting in the plane, which was cocked sideways out here at Dulles on the airstrip. A bunch of fire trucks came and started spraying foam on the airplane, but of course we're still in it. So
Right.
that doesn't do us any good.
No.
And then two, a bunch of those buses, the bus that carry the people, came, maybe 3 or 4, but they stopped way away from the airplane and they wouldn't go up to the airplane. So we just sat there. So by this time I wasn't trusting anybody's judgment, and I'm a bit of a, how do I say this without being too insulting? I'm a little bit of an action-oriented guy, if that's the word, myself, and I didn't have any faith at all. And then I said, hey, we got to get off of this airplane, because they always tell you in aviation that you got to get the people off the airplane.
Yeah, when you're not
Even
moving
if they
anymore,
get hurt.
Right. If you're not moving anymore, you should get off the airplane.
You got to get off the airplane. And they always said they had a famous incident out in Denver where a plane landed. I forgot what it was, a DC-9 maybe. And they kept telling the people, don't hurry, take your time, don't hurry, take your time. And the airplane caught on fire and killed almost everyone on board. And that changed the whole FAA NTSB code. Get the people off the airplane. If they break an ankle or two, or even an arm or anything, that doesn't matter. You gotta get them off the airplane. And tell people, get off the airplane, don't take anything with you, just get off the airplane. That's critical, because they used to tell them, take your time and don't panic. They don't say that anymore. They just say, get out.
Right.
Yeah, and if you push and shove and break or jump and break an ankle, sort that out later.
Yeah. That's something you'd rather have than the plane catching on
Yeah,
fire
than
again.
burning the plane, because
Yeah.
they had 2 or 3 accidents actually, but Denver's the one they always use, where a lot of people burned, and they had a lot of time, but they were frigging around inside. So that really scared me. So I told them, the flight attendants, I'm going to pop this door and I'm going out. They said, you can't do that. I said, watch.
Yeah.
So I started to pop the door myself. It turns out that the drivers, the Dulles drivers, who are GS 7s or whatever they are, 8, I don't know, they wouldn't go up close to the plane because they thought it was going to burn. Now, meantime, so you got the trucks spraying foam on the outside of the airplane. That doesn't do any of us any good.
No.
We're inside.
And just scares you even more.
Yeah, scared us to death. We look like a frosted wedding cake out there,
Right.
soaked in JP4. And they just sat there. And they said later, in all the investigations, and you'll see some of those letters in there, I'm saying they got to investigate this. That isn't right. They said, hey, we weren't hired as firemen, and we're not trained as firemen. We're bus drivers, and that's what we do.
Right.
So they wouldn't go up near the plane. Now, finally, somehow they convinced one or two to go up and get us off the plane, but we sat there for 10 to 15 minutes, which was very scary.
And that probably felt like a lot longer than 10 to 15 minutes, too.
Yeah, I was asked later, in fact, long story, but several people asked me. The French 60 Minutes did a special on this, and they kept saying you had to be frightened in the plane. You had to be scared in the plane. I said, actually, I wasn't. I don't know. I should have been, but how different things take different ways. I wasn't frightened at all through the whole incident, except when we were sitting there. Then I started getting frightened. I said, we're going to burn in this.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, they finally got us off, but that was the most scary part of the whole thing.
Did you, I'm sure you've been asked this before, too, did you feel like a hero at all? Or
Feel like what?
a hero? Or was it just something you knew you had to do, and you just...
I've always said that all I was doing basically, because they did, a lot of people, I got a lot of letters later. A group of the Mexicans come up and said I saved everyone's life and all that. I was just basically trying to save my own life.
Right.
And they happened to be on the same airplane.
Yeah, they were lucky enough to be
On the same airplane. I wasn't thinking of them. I was thinking of saving my own
let's
skin.
land so I can get off this airplane.
And they happened to be on the same plane. I would have behaved exactly the same if no one was on the plane. Frankly.
Right. So after you guys landed and got onto the like the tarmacs, I guess.
Yeah.
Where did they take you? Were you just free to
they
go?
took us to the terminal, to the VIP place that Air France had on the terminal, and someone from Air France came in and told us that it would be best if nobody said anything about this. They said it's better for security reasons and everything. If no one says anything about this whole incident,
Oh my gosh.
it would just be better. So they made a big point of just what I said. No one should talk about it, or no one should tell anybody about it. So, of course, I immediately went to the phone, the pay phone, didn't have a cell phone. Went to the pay phone and I called a friend of mine, Dave North, who was editor-in-chief of Aviation Week and Space Technology. And said,
That would be a good story for him to pick up, I feel like.
they were on it in a microsecond. I said, David, guess where I am and guess what just happened? He said, I don't know, Bill, what? So I went through the whole thing with him. So as far as Air France keeping a cap on it, no.
Right.
And why should they?
No. How were they able to keep... they obviously, because of the Paris crash, they continued flights of the Concorde, even though they had been breaking out these tires consistently.
Yeah.
How much longer after this incident was the Paris incident?
I was going to check that this morning. I've forgotten. God, like 15 years? That's a while ago.
So they really were
You ought to
running
check
it.
that. Huh?
They were running it for...
Oh, yeah. What they did do, they put some sheets of Kevlar under the wing and so on, but clearly not enough.
And that was in response probably to the
to
article.
response to this. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
And there were a number of articles about it, and then they said it was minor damage. Well, it wasn't minor. The airplane sat out here for weeks. They put a giant tarpaulins over it out of Dulles because you couldn't fly it with a hole in the wing. It took
Right.
a long time, weeks and weeks, if not months. It sat out there, but they kept it hidden in the back of a hangar. So, and they did everything they could to kill publicity. There wasn't that much publicity, not as much as you'd think. Well, is that right? Nah, I guess there was publicity. But they managed to dodge a lot of the responsibility.
I feel like that probably has a lot to do with no one was seriously hurt,
Yeah,
or no one was
exactly.
killed, so
Yeah.
people were more likely to just read that and be like, oh, no, everyone's fine.
Yeah, that it wasn't. And they kept toning down. Yeah, we blew a tire, but it's no big deal. Well, it was a very big deal. So then what? So then they said, okay, we're sending another Concorde over. We'll pay for everybody's overnight. I didn't need it because I live here. And then we'll fly you over tomorrow. We'll fly you over first thing in the morning in this other Concorde. Well, not surprisingly, only about half the people would go.
Right. Did you get back on the plane?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would have done that.
Ah,
But you were just, I feel like were you just like, the chances of it happening twice to me in
that's
2
to me-
days?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Right.
Yeah. So I went, but the plane was.
Did you have the same seat next to the starboard wing?
I don't think so.
I feel like I would have been more
Yeah.
at peace.
I mean, I don't know. I
Right.
don't recall. But I do remember the plane was like less than half full, and it had been totally full before. So,
Oh, yeah.
So then, like whatever years later it was with the Paris thing, I got a call here about 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was CBS. They said, "Are you the same William Lightfoot that was in the Concorde incident in Dulles?" And because it turns out the incident that I was in that we're talking about got tremendous publicity. Tremendous publicity. I was on Good Morning America, BBC, ABC, CBS, all the networks carried it. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And it finally got boring. It was frankly kind of fun for a little while to see all that work. It got
Right.
boring a while. Out at work, they used to say, "Geez, Bill, when does this end? There's press people over here all the time." I said, "I know." So anyway, yeah, it was written up every place, and it was on TV. Every major news show, I think, had it.
And after the Paris incident, did all of that come back?
Yeah.
A lot of it.
So I got a call about 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, when
Right.
the Paris incident happened, they said that an engine had blown up. That was the first day's publicity.
Right.
An engine had blown up, caught on fire, and the airplane had crashed and it killed everyone. So that day, about 3 a.m. or that night, I got a call from CBS Paris, and they said, "Are you the William Lightfoot that was on the blah, blah, blah plane?" And June 14, 1979. I said, "That's me." They said, "What do you think caused that incident
Right.
today that killed everybody?" And I said, I'm just about positive. I said, I saw the TV shows today.
Mhm.
I saw the flame coming out of the left wing, same place, where all the fuel was coming out before.
Right.
All the fuel's coming out, so there was a fire. And I said, I'll bet you anything if they go look at the landing strip there at the airport, they're going to find pieces of that wheel out there. And have they even looked? And they said, well, we don't know. They're saying it's just the engine blew up. I said, yeah, the engine probably blew up after a piece of the wheel went in it.
Right.
Because before the engine, one or more of the port side engines ingested a piece of magnesium, a big chunk of the wheel. That'll
Right.
blow an engine right there. But I said, I would bet money that it was exactly the same thing. Because look at the plume of fuel coming out of the left wing. It's exactly the same.
Right.
Exactly the same. And of course, it turns out that's what it was.
And the Paris incident is what finally sunk the Concorde
Yeah.
for good.
Yeah.
Was that a law that was mandated, like they had to put it down, or it was the company who owned them who decided we can't? or were they just not able to?
I don't know whether it was the combination of the insurance companies and everyone else. The basic problem is the wheels and tires on the Concorde are too small.
Right.
And you can't design around that because to stash, it needs bigger wheels and tires, which is what Boeing said at the time. They said that plane is too small and the wings are too thin to store to have adequately sized wheels and tires. There's too much pressure on the tires. There's too much stress on the tires. And the dilemma is you can't do that, make the wing any thicker because then the airplane won't go fast enough.
Right.
It has to have very, very thin wings to go fast. Now, the way bombers get away with that, like B-52s and so on, the supersonic, or let me say more like the Hustler, the B-58 Hustler, and aircraft like that, and supersonic bombers, they stash their wheels and their bogies in the fuselage. If you look, they've got little bitty stringer wheels hanging out off the wings, but the main landing gear is in the fuselage. But of course, you can't do that in a commercial airline because that's where the people go.
Right.
The fuselage is full of people and luggage, so it forces you to put the landing gear out of the wings. And on a small supersonic plane, you can't
not
put
gonna
big.
work.
They always knew, the designers always knew that they had made trade-offs and that the tires and wheels aren't big enough. And I've had Boeing engineers, I sat in a lot of hearings and I was a witness in several of these hearings. So I've been there, and when Boeing says that's one of the reasons we had to build a bigger plane, is that a smaller plane that would make sense in some ways, there's no place to put the landing gear,
Right.
basically.
So do you think there will ever be again a commercial supersonic aircraft?
I would think so, because a lot of people will pay a lot of money to go
Right.
that much faster.
Right. They're gonna have to figure out the designs and
The
stuff.
design, and also a huge problem is the supersonic boom. People around New York and Washington and Paris don't want that supersonic boom.
Was it incredibly loud? When
Oh,
it
yeah.
would-
Really loud. I mean, I had my office next to Dulles for years, and when they went over, if they, the couple of times they flew supersonic, yeah, the airplane is extremely loud itself, extreme. I mean, there's no doubt what's taken off when that thing takes off. And then to make it useful, you have to fly it supersonically. If you don't fly it supersonic, it's not faster than anything
Yeah, and then
else.
people wouldn't want there's no reason for them to pay so much more to be on the
Yeah.
plane if it's not
So-
going fast.
Like in the U.S., they had to fly subsonic over the U.S. Well, if you fly subsonic, the whole advantage of the thing goes down the tubes.
Right. So it was only beneficial if you were catching a flight from the East Coast
Across
to
the water.
Europe. Okay.
Or like going to the Pacific, it would be great. If you're going to L.A. and across the Pacific, although the Concorde didn't have that kind of legs, didn't have that kind of range.
Right.
But you can only fly it basically supersonically all over an unpopulated landmass, like Saudi Arabia. They don't care.
Right.
But the Americans don't want
No.
sonic booms going across the country.
Right. Jeez, that's crazy. Thank you again for the interview. I think that's all we have to do today.
All right, my pleasure.
yeah.
Thank you. There's a lot out there on the internet if you're interested. In
Yeah,
it.
definitely. I'll put in a bunch.
Here, and I made a copy of this.
Thank you.
Okay, so the Smithsonian, they did two actually. They did two kind of specials. You still see them. I have people all the time go, "Oh, I saw you on TV last night on the Smithsonian." So anyway, the second one they did was years after this incident, maybe about 2002, maybe 2003. They got their Concorde out here
Mm-hmm.
to put on display. So then Smithsonian called me and said, we're redoing our Concorde incident, and would you be on it? Would you testify or whatever, be on the show? I said, sure. So they said, okay, what we'd like to do, we're going to suspend the Concorde from the ceiling of the Udvar Hazy facility. We're going to hang it like a cable.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we'll do, we're going to go out there and we've got a bucket truck that we will put you and a photographer up in the airplane that's hanging out there.
Right.
And we want you to go back to your seat, which I think was 35B or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And then we'll interview you from the seat you were in. And you walk us through what happened from the seat and what happened on that day. And put the Mondieu stuff in. All right. So we go out there and they got a bunch of people in a bucket truck inside the Smithsonian and a couple of photographers and all like that. So we have to go way up in the air in this bucket and then go in the front hatch of the airplane,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then we're supposed to, the photographers and I are supposed to go back to my seat and they're going to, or the interviewer, the photographer and I are going to go to the back, the aft port of the airplane, and I'm going to sit in the seat and they're going to interview. Well, great, but it turns out it's hanging at that time by a single cable. So when we go back to the airplane, the whole airplane, the tail goes back, drops.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, scared the bejesus out of all of us.
And how high up were you guys?
50 feet.
Yeah, that's.
Well, it just all of a sudden, who thought the plane was going to move? They didn't. But so anyway.
That's another incident inside the
yeah,
model of the Concorde.
Whoa, what the hell? Well, then some guy down below says, you can't do that. You're going way to the end. You're upsetting the center of gravity. It was never meant to have people in it. After we hung it there, we never thought there'd be people in it. So we changed that plan. We weren't crawling back up the aisle.
No, I bet not.
Yeah, and said, never mind. We'll interview you down on the ground. I said, better.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that have been funny if that's what got you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The prop Concorde interview. You survived the hole in the wing.
Yeah, thing with the airplane on fire and everything, and then we get killed in the Concorde interview.
That's crazy.
So then, there were a lot of things like that. Then Air France, when the reports started coming out, Air France said I was never on the airplane. Which, of course, was total BS. I had my tickets.
Right, you had everything.
Yeah, I had everything.
You had witnesses, you had letters from people.
And then they said to the pilot and the thing, why didn't you listen to the guy? It looks like from everyone we've talked to, including the other passengers, he was telling you what was happening. Why didn't you listen to him? And the pilot says, well, I thought he was drunk. And I said later, well, even if you think the guy's drunk or crazy, you ought to go take a look.
Yeah, you might as well check out the maybe hole in the wing of an airplane.
Yeah, I mean, if it's... Yeah. And I said later, if you think the guy... Because one of them said, we thought he was crazy, and the pilot said, I thought he was drunk. Well, I wasn't drunk, of course. But if you think you got a nut back there, shouldn't you take a look at that?
Yeah.
That'd be nice to know, too. If you think the guy's crazy, what's he doing,
Right.
Maybe he's about to make a hole in the airplane.
Right. Either way, they should check out the guy in the back who's saying there's a hole in the wing.
Yeah, exactly.
And did you feel like Air France was trying to really cover up a bunch of what they were doing?
No doubt. Well, in fact, they asked all of us on there that it's better if we don't talk, the less we talk about this, the better. Well, that's even a stupid thing to say.
Right.
Maybe better for you.
Right.
Not better for anybody else. And it turns out that was part of the problem. If more people would have talked about it and their investigations would have been better, there wouldn't have been the second incident.
Right.
And NTSB and FAA didn't do much. I was in a thing only a few years ago, and the NTSB guy says, well, Bill will testify, meaning me. Bill will testify all of the corrective measures were taken, and I just sat there and looked at him. I mean, I hope they don't ask me to testify to that because I don't think they did much.
Right.
I think mostly they were covering their own ass, frankly.
And then, obviously, I'm not sure if you know this, but the Kevlar that was placed under the wings, obviously it wasn't enough.
It wasn't enough.
Was it ever gonna be enough? Like, have you talked to any engineers who were like, that just obviously, because the wings still had to stay under a certain weight.
Yeah.
So the Kevlar, I'm sure, was
Yeah,
so
and you can't change
minuscule.
the shape of the wing.
Right. So
Yeah.
I'm sure the Kevlar was so minuscule it didn't even do anything.
Yeah.
It was just a
No, I've read
makeup on a pig.
or heard that what they did. I mean, one, we can see it wasn't enough ourselves. You
Right.
don't have to be technical. The
Right.
airplane blew up. But also, I've heard it said, that they did do some kind of, partial moves, but they were never going to work.
Right.
It wasn't enough. Clearly, they didn't take enough corrective measures.
And did they have after this incident, did they need to hire obviously mass media was much different back then, but did they have to have commercials saying, don't worry, the Concorde's safe, anything like that?
I don't
or
remember any of that.
was it still just people were just going to ride it?
Yeah,
And you did end up riding it a couple times after that?
yeah.
And you would have kept riding
One
it.
or two, yeah.
And you would have kept riding it had the company kept paying for it.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
you know me,
Right.
I'm that kind of person.
Right. You want to get there in half the time.
Yeah, I don't worry that much about things. I should, but
Right.
I don't.
I think it's fit you pretty well. Nothing's happened. Not bad.
Yeah, I've been pretty lucky.
Yeah. Would you ride one if they brought it back today?
I think so.
I think I would have to try that.
Get somebody to pay for it.
And I'm if someone could pay for it. I'm hoping that it would be more safe if they brought it back.
I
at this
think they'll
point.
look
It
at
would
it
have
much
to.
harder. They'll
Especially
look at
with social media and everything, you can't get away with
No.
putting
No.
that many people at risk.
No, the first incident they talked about a lot, but didn't really do anything about it. They wouldn't let them get away with that anymore.
Right.
And the second one they killed a lot of prominent people. It was mostly Germans, but they were extremely well-off Germans.
Really?
Yeah, though there were, again, because they were Germans, there were almost no lawsuits. I was surprised. If you killed a couple of hundred rich Americans, you're going
Right.
to hear a lot more about
Right.
it than that.
And where was that flight going to from Paris?
I've forgotten.
And was the U.S. the only one who didn't allow the supersonic over our airspace? Or were there a few others?
I would be sure there were others.
Right.
Yeah, because sonic booms
Yeah. It,
are very annoying.
Right.
Yeah. You hear one once in a while around here with a
Mhm.
fighter, but they're
Right.
very, and people aren't going to allow them all.
and when they're going over you, it is loud to the point where whatever you're doing, you're hearing it.
Yeah.
And if that was going on all day, having people
Yeah.
go in and out, I'm
If
sure
you
that would
had
be
more
annoying.
commercial flights, no.
I'm not even sure that would. I couldn't see people being okay with that today. I don't think.
Oh, they never would.
No.
That kind of noise pollution is a bigger thing than it used to be.
Right.
And just the noise of the Concorde itself, you'd have a lot of problems with.
Right.
Its takeoffs, it's unbelievably noisy. Yeah, and the sonic boom. So I don't know what. I still think they'll end up with supersonic airplanes. They'll just a lot of routes like to Australia and things like that.
Right.
If you can get one that makes sense financially, that's big enough, you can make money with it.
I feel like that has to be at this point the biggest thing is will it make the companies money?
Yeah,
Right.
because image, and most countries, I think, aren't gonna put that kind of money up just for image.
Right.
And plus, it's already been done.
Right. So it's
as
not
big a
as
deal.
revolutionary.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But I think particularly to like China, as you know so well, China and Singapore and places like that, to the States, to be able to cut that travel time in half, a lot of people would pay a lot of money for that.
Right. I do think they would be able to get the money with the tickets. I do think there are companies that would expense that.
Yeah. And Dubai and Abu Dhabi, there's Saudi, there's a lot of places with an awful lot of money where people can drop, you know, big money for tickets and it wouldn't bother them if they
Right.
could cut the travel time in half.
Right.
So I think there will end up being, well, Boeing is working on a hypersonic plane right now. I don't know what the schedule is, but I know they're working on it.
And is that going to be commercial or is it just a
Commercial.
It is commercial.
Yeah, for sure.
Very cool.
Yeah, they're putting a lot of money in it. Whether the Europeans would do it again, I don't know. I know they hated to see Concorde go, and
Mhm.
they kept it as long as they possibly could.
Right.
Yeah.
Seemed like it. They really pushed the limits with it.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
kept it as long as they could, and as it turns out, a little longer.
Yeah. little too long.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
yeah, the whole thing is pretty interesting.
Yeah.